Okay, so I just converted the audio file from what recorded on Zoom into a WAV file. And now I'll take you through the process of how to use Audacity to edit the program or the audio file and put it together and get it ready to release as a new podcast episode. So to do this, I've opened up Audacity here, and Audacity is a free program. I'm going to open a new file, and I'm going to go to uh, the file folder that I had for David Brown for his episode. So this audio only, I'm going to drag this over. Audacity gives me a warning that basically to make a copy of it before I move it over. So I say OK, and it's uploading the file into Audacity. Now, just a quick tip: as I do my recordings, at the beginning, I always leave a couple seconds of silence. That way, as you do the editing, you can try to pull out any of the background content. So this looks like where the silence is going to be. And just to make sure, I'm going to play just before and see if that's what I was leading up to. There we go. So I'm going to use this tool right here, the selection tool, and I'm going to clip right here and go all the way to the beginning of the recording. And you can just hit delete on your keyboard, and that goes away. So that was kind of the fluff before the actual content for the recording. And then you can also scroll down towards the end of the episode. And if you try to keep track of how long your episodes go, I'm going to guess it's probably around here somewhere, but I do have some post-interview discussions, so I'm going to clip that out of this as well. So here he's given us contact information, so it's at the end. Okay, so that is the end of the recording. So I'm going to use the selector tool here and get all the post-interview discussion, and I'll delete that from this file. So now what I'm left with is strictly what was in the podcast interview. Now from here, I'm going to select these few seconds here at the beginning, and I'm going to come up here to Effect. And I do the same thing on every episode, so I kind of have my system down for the editing. So Effect, I'm going to come to Noise Reduction. You get the noise profile, which it's basically pulling this area that I highlighted. And then I'm going to do Control A to select all of it. I'm going to go back to Effect, Noise Reduction, and so you notice that I have my presets already in here for noise reduction, sensitivity, frequency. This works well for me. You may start with this and play with it to see what works best for you. So I'm going to hit OK, and that's going to apply that noise reduction to the entire track. So it'll take about a minute to go through all of that noise reduction. And sometimes it'll speed up a little bit. But after the noise reduction is done, then I'm going to come back and delete this, the very beginning with the silence. That way it's just a little bit less for the rest of the editing process. But it looks like about 30 seconds left. And really the whole process, the general editing part, really doesn't take all that long. So 15, 14. I guess I could use the magic of video and fast forward through this, but this is done now. Okay, so the noise reduction has been applied. I'm going to take out the first few seconds. I'm going to select all again. I'm going to go back to Effect, and now I'm going to normalize the audio. So that's going to, I'd keep this set the normalized peak amplitude. I've played around with that some. Negative 1.0 decibels tends to work well with the way I record. So this goes through quite a bit quicker than what the noise reduction does. So I do, again, the steps: noise reduction, normalize, And then the next step, I'm going to keep it all highlighted still, and I'm going to come up to compress. So effect, and then the compressor. And I've played around with these settings as well. So these compressor settings, again, work well for me. Maybe you take a minute to look at them or pause the video and write down what those settings are. You can try them and then adjust from there. But I'm going to hit OK, and it's going to go through and do the compressor. And after the compressor part is done, I go back and do the normalize again. So it just kind of makes everything smoother. And throughout the process, you'll notice the audio marks appear, the audio waves will get bigger and smaller as you go through the different processes. So for example, the compressor, you think they would get smaller. These audio waves are actually going to get larger as we do the compressor. See, so the audio waves got larger. Now, so we did noise reduction, we did normalize, we did compressor. Now I come back to normalize, and this will just take a couple of seconds. Goes through it again real quick, and you'll see these audio waves get shorter again, but they're going to be more consistent. And there we go. So you can come up here and hit play. So that sounds pretty good. Now I edit in some other things too. So I have an intro, I have an outro. Right now I'm promoting a new podcast guide for creating your own chamber podcast. And I have an ad that I put in here. So I'll show you how these work. First of all, for where the ad goes, I'm going to find where, so you'll see as I do the recording, let's see. Okay, so right there is going to be where we split for the ad. So you see I got the selector tool. I just marked right there in that blank space. And then I'm going to come up to edit, clip boundaries, and split. So now these are two separate files there, and you can use this time shifter tool. And now you see how that there's a gap in between there. So I can insert the ad into that space. So I'm going to pull up the files here, and we'll go through what I've got for, so we'll start with the Chamber Chat Podcast Guide. So that comes through. And then I do the intro for the podcast. So intro with music here. So I'm going to put that in. Let's see. And you notice you can just drag these around to the different levels. And every time you add a file, it's going to add a new bar down here, but you can drag them up to another bar. And I try to manage it with just 2 bars. So that way, if there's overlap, you can see the overlap and adjust it as necessary. So this is down here is going to be my little intro about the podcast guide for Chambers. Up here's my regular intro. And then I do a thing where I have my kids do a little shout out for me, and just not a shout out necessarily, but they just say a little bit about me at the beginning of the of each episode. So that's what I'm going to put in next. So let me go find that. Okay, so that I'm going to come up here. I'm going to go back to my episodes audio, kids intros. And for this episode, I'm using intro number 13, which is my daughter Bailey. And Then I can drag that up here to this bar. We can get rid of this bar. So now again, intro with the podcast guide, my regular intro to the show, my kids' introduction of me. And then this is the first chunk of episode. And then I have my ad that I can put in here. So if I go back to episodes audio, final. So, and you'll have to organize your files the way that you see best fit for you. But I kind of have my system that works for me. So I've got my ad plugged in there. So again, podcast guide, intro music, kids intro, introducing me, first chunk of the episode. This is the ad, the long chunk of the episode. And then the only other thing I have to add is the outro. So as I come here, I've got updated outro here. And I'm going to move this up. Get rid of that bar. And there we go. So now there is a little bit of fine tuning. So I'm going to come up here to the zoom in button and get to the beginning here. So I know this is, this is the guide portion. So I'm going to listen to the end of it and see how it transitions into the intro music. Okay, so I like that. And so I zoomed in here again. Now, when my kids speak on this intro part, I like it to overlap on the tail end of the intro music and then but right up to where I start talking on the episode. So we'll see how this sounds. Okay, those seem to line up well. And then we'll move over to the section with the ad. And you'll see on the ad, I have a little bit of music leading in, kind of fading in and fading out of the ad. So we're going to shift this so that the fading in music kind of overlaps a little. And we're going to move this so the fading out music overlaps a little and then see how it sounds. Okay, that seems to work well. We'll see the end. All right, I like how that sounds. And then we just got to check out the exit part here, the outro section, and make sure that lines up well. So as I shift this over, and we'll see how this sounds. So I'm going to slide it over just a little more. I want that music to start a little earlier. All right. Now there's all sorts of other tools that you can use in Audacity. For example, let's see. Well, I'll play with it and go through the introduction a little bit here as I read David's bio. So sometimes if you get too many of the ums and maybe stuttering or something, so you could always highlight a section. Again, going back to the selector tool, you could highlight a section and delete if you maybe had a coughing fit or stuttered through something, or if you had those ums and things like that that you need to take out, you can do that. Another thing, sometimes you'll get a ping or something that picks up on the recording. Maybe you or the person you're interviewing has an email come in and you hear that alert come across. If you're able to isolate just that sound, like if the sound comes through when no one else is talking, and then you can highlight that little bit. Let's pretend this is it here. And you can either delete it or you can come up here to this little silence audio selection and you'll see what I have selected goes smooth. It just takes it right out, but it doesn't shorten it. Now I want that in there, so I'm going to come back and undo the silence so it comes back in here. But you have the zoom and zoom out features. Another tool that you can use is the playback speed. So this is helpful for me sometimes as I'm doing the editing. If I want to do a quick listen through, but maybe I've got 3 or 4 episodes I'm editing in one day, I can speed this up to 1.5 times speed and really get through it a little bit quicker. I mean, it sounds like Alvin and the Chipmunks are talking, but it is a helpful tool at times. And there's some other tools like up here, this envelope tool. This is helpful when sometimes your guest has much lower audio waves than you do. So for example, we see some of these lower waves versus I can tell that's when David's talking, this is when I'm talking. And let's just double check that. Yeah, so David's talking. Well, that's him talking too. So sometimes to balance these out, you could use this envelope tool and it helps you pull up these audio waves. It is a little tedious and there's other tools and resources available like auphonic.com, and I'll show you in the next video how to use Auphonic, but that will level out those sound waves. But that pretty much covers how to do the editing. Now you do have effects here, so like if you're doing your intro and outro, you can find a good piece of music and make sure it's not copyrighted and that it's okay to use on podcasts. But you can do a fade in and a fade out. So if you have that music, you want to fade it in, you can say something for an intro or outro and then fade out. Anyways, there's all sorts of tools in here. Most of them you probably won't ever need to use, but for a free resource, Audacity is really it's something pretty neat. So I'm done with the editing on this. So I'm going to come here, I'm going to go File and Export. And when you upload a podcast to Libsyn, it needs to be an MP3 format. So I'm going to export as an MP3. And then the file name, you see I have a kind of the format that I go. So episode, and E for episode, the number, the person's name, and then final. And then you have the other details. So on here, we're going to copy the same format as we had here with Liz Horton, but this is going to be episode 71 with David Brown. David Brown final, and we'll hit save. It'll mix down, and then it comes up with the meta tags. So here, this is going to bring up more detailed information for the file. So artist name, that's going to be me. Track title, this is going to be, let's see, we called his Leadership in a Crisis. Leadership in a Crisis with David Brown. Album title, this is for Chamber Chat Podcast. Track number is going to be 71. The year is 2020. Genre, I just keep it basic on here and say business. You can put whatever you want. It doesn't really matter on the genre here. Comments, I leave blank. And then on this other field, I put the show notes. So the show notes, and that will be at chamberchatpodcast.com/episode 71. And then you hit OK. And that's going to put it all together into a nice little MP3. But that is how Audacity works. It is pretty simple, straightforward. I do give my guests on my podcast a little warning that although I can do editing on this, I do try to keep the editing to a minimum. You saw how I was able to edit this episode, and I don't know how long it is, 5 or 6 minutes, maybe a little bit longer. But I literally could spend hours if I wanted to go through and really pick it apart. But this kind of shows you the basics of how to use Audacity. And in the next video, I'll show you how to use, I'm going to upload the same file into a phonic and show you how that works. But we'll see you on the other side.